There are 7 tight ends that could finish as the overall tight end 1 in fantasy this year. We'll tell you who they are in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. And it's a Wednesday show, so of course that means that Matt Williamson is here. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Go check out his new YouTube channel as well. On today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions, including should you continue to hold Jonathan Mingo? Is now the time to buy Ricky Pearsall? Anticipating a trade in San Francisco. But before we get to those questions, let's get to this one from Josh. He wants to know which tight ends realistically have the ability to finish as tight end 1 this year. Matt, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I think we're kind of hitting a golden age of the tight end position because we have the stalwarts that have been doing it year after year, and history shows great tight ends fade away slow. I mean, Jason Witten and Antonio Gates ran like me at the end of their career, but they still produced. You know what I mean? Like, it's a wisdom position. And Brock Bowers this year, a great tight end class last year, a great influx of talent at the position. And I think the league is using young tight ends a lot better, or facing a lot more zones. And then there's guys in their prime, as usual. So I think there's a lot of candidates, probably more than most years, and it makes me want to invest heavily in a tight end less and less. But I think there's 7 names that we could come up with. And those 7 names aside, and we'll get to them in a minute, this position's obviously a little strange too. A guy like Dalton Schultz or Jake Ferguson that you don't think of as in those top 7, and they aren't. Maybe they catch 13 touchdowns or something goofy this year and really don't even have an awesome year. They just happen to get in the end zone a ton and kind of luck into being tight end 1. But that aside, I think there's 7 names.
Yeah, let's go through some of the names right now. So, Kate, I want you to chime in here as well. You just say yes or no if you believe this tight end can lead all tight ends in fantasy points this year. Let's start with Sam Laporta, tight end 1 in Dynasty. That's an obvious yes, of course, right?
It is an obvious yes.
Obvious yes. Matt, yes. All right. Next one. Trey McBride.
No.
Ooh. Wow.
Matt, what do you think?
Can't happen. We talked about him last week, and I didn't have a problem with him being Dynasty tight end 2. I mean, we could fight if he's 2 or 3 or, splitting hairs. I think he absolutely can, and part of it's, can I write the story where he's tight end 1? I can write that story and make it pretty believable, in my opinion.
I'll go yes, just because I do think he's only 24. I do think he could get the touchdowns this year to get there. So I'm saying yes. Brock Bowers, Kate.
No.
I'm a no as well.
I'm a no too.
Yeah. Currently tight end 3 right now in Dynasty League football. So that's kind of funny that as tight end 3, we don't believe he can finish as tight end 1. Shows you what his upside though is. Mark Andrews, Matt.
Absolutely.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah. Travis Kelce.
Certainly.
Yes.
Happened before.
If I said that Travis Kelce is the favorite right now to be tight end 1 this year, would you disagree, Matt?
I don't think he's my first tight end off the board in redraft, so I guess I disagree. But I also think Laporta probably takes a tiny step backward. I mean, just in terms of usage. And Kelce concerns me slightly just because I think he'll kind of be on a pitch count until the playoffs. That I don't know that he'll be out there as many snaps. So I understand. I can certainly understand it. I mean, his track record's ridiculous, of course.
All right, let's start getting to the next tier of tight ends because there's a pretty big drop off, at least in ADP. Kate, Dalton Kincaid.
Yes, absolutely.
Matt.
Not fighting you there. I think he's going
Okay.
to lead the Bills in receiving.
Kyle Pitts.
Absolutely.
100%.
Now, this is where it gets tricky after this. TJ Hawkinson, probably not just because he's likely going to spend the first 5, 6, 7 games on the PUP list. But the next group is the one I really want to get into. Matt.
Could Hawk lead in points per game?
I still say no.
With a rookie quarterback. No.
Back slow, too.
Yeah. George Kittle.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. This is where it gets even a little bit more dicey. Evan Ingram, Kate.
Absolutely.
Wow.
All right, explain.
He finished with 1 fewer fantasy point than Sam Laporta last year. Why are we acting like he wasn't the only tight end in the league to have 100+ receptions? Why are we acting like he didn't lead all tight ends in terms of total targets? Had 963 receiving yards, only had 4 touchdowns. I think there's a lot of room when we're projecting this Jaguars offense to project an increase in overall scoring production, especially if we're dealing with a healthy healthy Trevor Lawrence. Why not Evan Ingram?
Matt?
I think you convinced me, to be honest with you. I didn't realize he was that far off the lead, or that 1 point behind the lead last year. And I don't think his role's going to drop. I don't look at Brian Thomas and say, oh, boy, Evan Ingram's become obsolete. But, Kate, no on McBride, yes on Ingram. I mean, I think they got to at least be in the same conversation.
I mean, Evan Ingram already did more than Trey McBride. And I get it. Trey McBride is young, but I think so much. And I've said this every time we talk about Trey McBride. I think he has benefited so tremendously from a lack of a wide receiver 1. I think Marvin Harrison is that guy. They're going to have a healthy Michael Wilson. I think this offense is going to be more spread out. And I think that's just going to limit my overall upside for Trey McBride. The only stat you can really point to, and it's a sticky one, led all tight ends in yards per route run. That's great. But overall efficiency, he wasn't even close to the type of production that we saw from Evan Ingram as in arguably a more crowded offensive situation. I just think I'm going back, and I'm not trying to discount Trey McBride. I just think we are so massively inflating the level of upside just based on the performance we saw when he was pretty much the last man standing on that offense. I
want to get
maybe I'm just being a hater now. I don't know.
That's okay.
No, there's strong points.
I want to go through a couple more tight ends really quickly. I'm going to group the next 3 together: David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, and Dallas Goedert. Matt, do any of those guys, in your opinion, have a chance to finish as the tight end 1?
Probably not, but if I had to put a chip down on the 3, it would definitely be Njoku. I mean, his after the catch stuff is great. Yep. His flashes are really, really impressive. He seems to have come into his own. I like the offensive play designer. So, I mean, maybe I could write the story on Njoku, but I don't think it's possible.
Kate, of those 3, which one is the most intriguing for you?
I'll take Njoku of the bunch, but if you asked me to bet on any of them, I wouldn't.
Okay. The last name that I want to throw out there that I think legitimately has a chance to finish as the tight end 1, and Matt, you actually laid out the case, how this could happen. Luke Musgrave is being drafted as tight end 14 right now. To me, he seems like he could be the type of tight end that all of a sudden catches 12 or 13 touchdowns. Certainly with Tucker Kraft, injured, missing all the offseason so far. What if Musgrave is just the featured red zone option in this offense, and Jordan Love takes a step and he's throwing 33 touchdowns this year? I won't be surprised if Musgrave is inside the top 3 or 4 tight ends after this year.
Interesting. And Peacock and I this week have been doing breakout offensive players. And yesterday we did tight ends, and Musgrave was my number 1. And he was either my 1 or 2 tight end overall in that great tight end class. I had him ahead of Michael Mayer, not even just for Dynasty, for the real world. I love his athleticism. his size, his movement skills. You mentioned the red zone stuff, but I also think he's a field stretcher. There's so many mouths to feed in that passing game, including another tight end in Kraft.
But I think there's also the chance, because there's so many mouths to feed, there's not a bona fide number one receiver in this offense yet. Why couldn't it just be Musgrave? Why couldn't
You know
he
what's
be
funny,
the one?
Marcus, is as a part of your argument, you said Jordan Love takes a step forward. He throws for 33 touchdowns. He already threw for 32.
I know, one more.
That's a step
right?
forward.
It's a little baby step.
But I'm just saying, like, it's crazy to think that, like, projecting him to take a step forward only means 33 passing touchdowns. But Marcus, can I just clarify? So
sure.
Evan Ingram, yes or no? Does he have potential to finish as the overall
You
tight end
convinced me. Yeah,
you convinced me as a yes. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was going to say, if we're talking about Tucker Kraft right now and we're not talking about Evan Ingram.
No, I mean, yes. Yeah, we are. I'm not on Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave. I would rather, I think Ingram obviously has a better chance than Musgrave, but I think he's the very last one that you could make at least somewhat of a convincing argument that he could finish as tight end one. All right, let's go ahead and move on.
Real quick, Marcus. I will give you on Musgrave. This might be your last chance to buy him at a reasonable rate.
I would agree. Now is the time to buy him before we even get to training camp, because once the training camp videos hit, that price is going to the moon. All right, let's transition over to the San Francisco 49ers. Let's talk about Ricky Pearsall and his dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer that it gets to tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concert, comedy, and theater events near you. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And you can save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose your exact seats. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, this next question comes from Craig. He wants to know, should you buy low on Ricky Pearsall under the assumption or hope that the 49ers will move Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo Samuel before the season starts? Matt, why don't you go first?
I'm not going to say yes or no, but I am going to say a lot about it, because Peacock, who hosts Locked On 49ers, he's a Niners guy. I'm obviously a Steelers guy that could really use an Aiyuk or a Samuel or a receiver. We go back and forth on this all the time. And one of the golden rules of my career is trying to read the tea leaves of what teams are telling you, even though that's not what comes out of their mouth. And not only did they draft Pearsall in the first round, but they used a 4th-round pick on Jacob Cowling. I mean, that's odd behavior. They gave a contract to Jennings, who I really, really like. They gave a contract to McCaffrey, who Peacock thinks will be a running back, but is going to be the new Deebo Samuel before long. He's going to be the guy running routes, doing the Deebo stuff to save his career. And it leaves me thinking, do you really need Aiyuk and Deebo? But then his argument, which I think is even stronger than all this tea leaf reading, is the Niners don't care. They just want to win the Super Bowl, and they're going all in, and they're not going to get rid of a good player because they're so good and the window's closing soon. So I get both sides, and I think they would love to sign Aiyuk and trade Deebo after the season, but Aiyuk isn't exactly cooperating either. So If you deal Deebo right now, then then Aiyuk even gets more power in the contract negotiations. But if you deal your favorite guy, Aiyuk, and you don't think Deebo's a long-term answer, then all of a sudden you're pretty short at the position. So I lean towards Pearsall as a 2025 asset.
Let me ask you a question real quick, Matt, just a quick follow-up. Do you believe that the 49ers are basically going into this year thinking we're only going to keep one of Deebo and Aiyuk, and this year
Yes.
will kind of tell us which one we're going to keep?
Yes, but I think they'd prefer it's Aiyuk, except he's very expensive and
He's
the
going to be
wide
way
receiver
more
market's
expensive.
going crazy. Yeah.
Okay, what do you think?
Here's the thing. I mean, regardless of kind of what they want, obviously, in an ideal world, you keep Deebo, you pay, even we didn't mention Juwan Jennings, who they brought back on a 2-year deal worth, just like right around, I think, $15 or $16 million, not chump change for a guy who, he plays a blocking role, not heavily involved as a receiver necessarily. But I do think reading the tea leaves, they tell you that they are preparing for a world where they understand that keeping both of these receivers under contract is going to be a difficult prospect at the very least, right? You look at their cap space heading into 2025, for instance, they're still projected. I know Christian McCaffrey's contract shifted things around. They're still projected at over $23 million over the cap. You look at 2026, they are bottom 5 in terms of projected cap space for 2026. Like
They
you
haven't
can
even
keep
paid
pushing
Purdy
money
yet.
down the
Right.
road, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the luxury of having all of this money to pay your wide receivers. Like, I think Pearsall was a move to ensure that a bit. I think Callie, another move to kind of ensure. I think Christian McCaffrey, you're probably right, going to play more of this hybrid receiving role. Maybe they'll limit some of his running back touches. They took a third round pick and used it on Isaac Guerrero, who's a very speedy, big build running back. Like, I think everything tells you that they're looking to move on, but I do think that this is probably kind of the last buy low window. Because like at the end of this year, right? Like, you're gonna definitively have an answer. Either you're gonna get Brandon Aiyuk under contract, or he's gonna hit free agency. That's going to increase the price of Pearsall. I just think like this is probably the last moment in time where we're really not going to have any answers, and I do
Matt,
think that suppressed the value.
Matt, I wanted to ask you just about your evaluation of Ricky Pearsall coming into the draft and now that he's on the 49ers. Like, what do you see as the player, and how do you think he fits into this offense?
I love him. I'm really high on him. I thought he went a little earlier than I would have expected, but I understand it. There was a run of receivers there at the end of the first round. I think he's really attractive to them because he can play inside and out equally as well, in my opinion. And what's huge about him, I think, for them now, even if it's in limited role, is he's a man coverage beater, and Deebo is not. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that when you play heavy man coverage teams, and this hurt them against the Chiefs particularly, that it's an Aiyuk game. And when you play heavy zone teams, it's a Deebo team. And I bet Shanahan and all his wisdom and knowledge hates that predictability where Pearsall can do both for you eventually, and come in the league against these man heavy teams and maybe play more 3 receiver sets. And, Jennings also does a lot of the dirty work as well. So I'm a big fan. And frankly, I think Pearsall's dynasty stock probably has nowhere to go but up. I mean, even if he doesn't play the first half of the season, and there's all kinds of rumors about Deebo or Aiyuk leaving, we know
Wide
who the
receiver
successor is.
47. Yeah, wide receiver 47 right now, Matt.
I'm buying him at that price. Yeah.
Kate, are you?
Yes, absolutely buying at that price, and just kind of considering the big picture here. Yeah, if you're going to have, a potential target leader in a Kyle Shanahan offense, I wasn't necessarily as high on Pearsall's upside for fantasy. I loved him as a route runner, but had some just general question marks. Never really had a true breakout season with Florida. 5th year player coming out a little bit on the older side, but like it all of that can kind of be overlooked when you're in Kyle Shanahan's offense at that price. I think you've probably got to buy.
I think you do. I mean, that price is just so cheap for a first round receiver on a really good team. I'm curious to see what happens in San Francisco. We'll continue to follow that story all off season long, but let's transition to Jonathan Mingo. Mingo, a high second round pick by the Panthers a year ago. Does he have any dynasty value left? We will discuss that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, on our next show, we're going to be looking at the latest batch of ADP from Dynasty League Football. We'll talk about some of the biggest risers and fallers, so make sure you tune in for that. But let's finish up here with a question from Josh, who wants to know, is Jonathan Mingo still worth stashing with the additions Carolina made on offense this offseason? Matt, what do you think?
So in these leagues before rookie drafts, when you have to make your cuts and you can't do it during the draft, he was like my hardest decision because I had him in 2 leagues. I'm like, should I hang on to him, or if I make a trade back and pick up extra picks, would I be happy if he was off my roster? So I think this is a really good conversation. And I mentioned how Peacock and I are talking about breakout players this week. I lumped Mingo and Quentin Johnston together because we knew they were both really raw coming into the league, and they're big, strong, fast guys, and they were terrible as rookies, and somewhat predictably, but we kind of should expect that big, raw guys don't come in the league and do a lot quickly. That being said, Mingo got buried much more than Quentin Johnston in Carolina. I mean, in a big, big way. And Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think an article just popped up on PFF today about wide receiver strength of schedule, and you want those Panthers. I'm paying attention, but you highlighted Deontay, not Mingo, rightfully so. So
yes,
he's as close to a roster clogger, final cut guy as I think you could get.
Kate.
Yeah, if I can get him off of my roster for pretty much anything at this point, I'm going to do it. And again, a lot of that kind of comes with reading the tea leaves, right? This is a new organization that, they're looking to go in a much different direction, right? They had the change at head coach, moving in a new offensive philosophy that I do think, everything they've done for this offense, I think has been generally pretty good. Made some moves on the offensive line. But it's really hard to ignore the fact that despite that draft capital, which again, kind of a previous regime, they still went out. They traded for Deontay Johnson. They, used that first round pick on Xavier Legette. Reading the tea leaves, they're saying, I don't think Jonathan Mingo's the guy. And for a player that already kind of showed us some questionable, production, despite kind of having this golden opportunity in a largely barren offense to stand out, make your mark. All of that combined tells me that the Carolina Panthers don't look at Jonathan Mingo as that guy. And if, the valuation of him at where he was drafted was already kind of questionable where it was, I don't think he's done anything in his tenure with the team to prove otherwise. Yeah, I'm out.
He's a big slot receiver on a team that now has 2 slot receivers ahead of him, right? Xavier Legette, I think we all believe probably a big slot in the NFL. That's where he was primarily used at South Carolina. They brought back Adam Thielen, who is a slot receiver, right? Right now, Jonathan Mingo on Dynasty League Football, wide receiver 87. You can comfortably move on from him. However, for me, he is a person that I'm having on my waiver wire speed dial whenever the Panthers decide to move on, because I do think in a different situation and on a different team, there is some hope here. He is so young. I just don't see it happening with the Panthers anytime soon.
So Deontay's a free agent after the year. I would bet Thielen's not. This is probably his last hurrah.
Yeah.
So a year from now, maybe he's relevant. And again, he's a really tough one for me. I mean, he's my last roster spot, if anything. My only hesitation is 1 year ago, I had hope for the player, and he was on the worst team in the league. I mean, it wasn't exactly a great situation.
It's not, but at the same time,
He did nothing.
he did nothing,
Yeah.
and the Panthers have gone out and traded for Deontay Johnson and drafted Xavier Legette in round 1. Like they're telling us what they think of Jonathan Mingo. Maybe he surprises us, and maybe he has a fantastic training camp, and he's the perfect post-hype sleeper. But I think right now you can comfortably move on from him if you need the roster spot, because I just don't see, if you're waiting for something to happen, 15 months from now, I'm good moving on and not having any real worries about it. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Again, every day we'll be back to talk about the latest updates in terms of ADP for quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. So make sure that you tune in for that. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. You can go check out his new YouTube channel as well. Follow Kate at Kate Majuk. Go read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you next time.